that doesn't work. Going upside down.
You
Okay.
look, that's perfect.
Okay.
So Tara, you are the makeup department head on Godless, which was the 7.5 hour Netflix Western limited series. You've got a lot of experience doing Westerns, but what made Godless different from some of those other Westerns that you've worked on?
I think, uh, well, it's a female-driven cast. Um, there's a good balance between the females and the males, but I just think that showing, you have strong women characters like Michelle Dockery's character is a very strong woman, and the ensemble is a lot of women. Um, you know, a lot of westerns, the women are prostitutes or girlfriends or wives, or there's just not a lot of there hasn't been a lot of room for female characters to lead a western. So I really think in that way, and just the storytelling, Scott's writing, Scott Frank, our director, he really was very thorough in the characters and really their backstories and their history and everything. So I think you get a real sense of the story seeing Godless.
Mhm. Well, it is a typically male-dominated genre, and you're right. I mean, we do often women in this genre, or prostitutes, or wives, or mothers. But here, I mean, they really do have to take charge of their own destinies due to circumstances. So I'm wondering, when it came to designing the looks of these women, how did that dynamic affect the work that you would usually do?
Well, I think what was great is, Betsy Heineman, our costume designer, and Jordy Sheffer, our hair department head. What was great about what Betsy did is she created an individuality to each of the women. So it allowed us to kind of hone in on that. So it allowed us to create a look with the makeup, with the wardrobe, and with the hair. And so Betsy kind of gave us the palette, and then we just enhanced it. So I feel that it really helped with everybody having a very individual look to them and their character. Uh, it's the research on a western is always the same. I've done so many of them. I kind of know it in the back of my head. But what I loved doing was just when you have to create a makeup no makeup look, it's interesting to have to you want to keep the period seamless so the audience doesn't look at it and go, oh, that woman has eyeshadow and there's no eyeshadow in the 1800s. Or it's really important to keep everybody seamless and to not throw anyone out of the period. So I think that just trying to keep everybody as organic and as authentic as possible was a really big key to how it looked.
Mhm. You mentioned the individuality of the women. I wonder if you could just drill down on that a little bit and give us, I mean, specifics like, how you differentiated Michelle Dockery's character from Merritt Weaver's character, for instance, or, other examples. I mean, there are other women in this town who are not as, open to the idea of living without a man, for instance, and are very much wanting to, when the men come to town, wanting to have them stay.
Yeah, I think Michelle and Merritt, especially, Merritt was so minimal. It was really important for us to keep her as natural as possible. And when you're working out in the elements that we were, our foundation, truthfully, is all skincare because that's what's going to sustain them through 6 months of work. Um, we use a lot of moisturizing tints, bronzers, um, matte matte colors in the naturals, um, very minimalistic kind of light-handed, um, and I think with um, the ladies of LaBelle who were the ones that really needed more to have men or wanted men around, you'd see it in Charlotte. She'd be very put together, um, and Michelle was more of an organic, natural, authentic kind of with her hair down and braided. Merritt was always back in ponytail and a hat. The other women were always more put together and prided themselves on that. So, it was a little use of, we would dye eyelashes so that we wouldn't have to use mascara. Um, a little Michelle Dockery. I don't think I hardly ever put blush on her. And like with Charlotte's character, we would, you'd have the cheeks and that kind of thing. And it sounds minimalistic, and it really is, but it's so important to be that way in a Western because you do not want to take the audience out of the period.
Mhm. And I mean, added into that, since this is out in the Old West, you've got a lot of dirt and grime and dust and things like that. So can you talk a bit about applying that not just to the women, obviously, but all of the men who are in this show as well?
Yeah, it's really important for layering and texturing to provide the travel. Like with the Griffin gang, we actually created pigment to match all the towns. LaBelle had its own pigment, Creed, LaBelle, um, Blackdom. And so when the writers would go through a town, the dirt and texture that we use would be of that town, and then if they wrote into the next town. So we would give the illusion of a passage of time and travel, which was great. And there's a Western little trick where you make them all squint their eyes and you stipple on the dirt, and they have the writer's look. Um, but we also, you know, I think layering and texturing is the key. And we used, most of the guys all had bronzers on to show writing. And we do this thing, which I love to do. And actually, I had done a Western called Appaloosa with Viggo Mortensen. And if you look at that movie, Viggo was the first person that's like, Tarra, you got to give me a hat line. Go out to the Wranglers right now and tell them to take their hats off. So I went out to all the Wranglers and I'm like, lined them up and said, hey, take off your hat. Well, every single one of them had a hat line where, they were white on top and they had the tan. So we did that a lot with Scoot, with Jeff, but very subtly. So you can just barely see where the skin tone is lighter on the top than it is on the whole face.
Mhm. And I'm sure hygiene must play a role in what you're doing as well, because obviously some of these people are going to be bathing and brushing their teeth as much as some of the others are. So, I mean, can you talk a bit about, I mean, for like the teeth, for instance, or their hygiene? How does that affect your work?
Well, it was great because we had 6 weeks of prep, which is very rare anymore. And Scott Frank was very adamant about like we needed to have prep time to take each person and really do tests on them. So when the Griffin gang came in, we had a special effects makeup trailer set up. We had 4 makeup and hair trailers working every day. And we had a special effects, and we did the dental cast on all the Griffin gang in house, created their vacuum forms. They were hand painted. And so they would come in the mornings and they'd have their teeth, their vacuum form, and they'd put them on. And so that created their decay and tobacco stained look for them. And then we also, where the Devlin boys he gets his teeth knocked out in the train. We had a dental cast and his teeth made for him so that he could wear those after that scene. So, I mean, it was like, and there was a lot of hand painting going on, which was a continuity issue. So we had to match it every day. But we had broken capillaries through some of the guys, and we had well, what we would do is use a material called third degree, which we would hand paint on scars for the guys. Um, and it was tough because we shot it in a crossboarding. I don't know if you've ever heard of crossboard.
Could you elaborate what that is? Yeah.
Basically, what it is that you're not shooting like an episodic. So you're not shooting episode 1, then 2, then 3, then 4. You're shooting a big movie. So you're shooting 7.5 hours of television as a movie. And so we could shoot episode 1, 6, and 3 in the same day. So we had to be prepared continuity wise to really keep track of that. And things like the passage of time where we see Jeff Daniel younger with Roy's character, or Jack O'Connell. And so we couldn't shave Jeff and make him So what basically the limitations that we had was we had to go in and take all the gray or most of the gray out of his hair and his beard, take the texture down in his skin, and make him look younger than in the present day, which was him in the beard, texture, gray hair, gray beard, that kind of thing. So it was, and then there's always going back to the grime. It's like we always like to have the dirt under the fingernails and texture in the hands, and we use a step clean method with all of that. And we have skin illustrator palettes that are alcohol based palettes that really come in handy for that kind of stuff because they've got a great palette called the grunge palette. So it's just dirt colors and it's really handy.
Violence is also something that comes with the territory in this genre, and I mean, you mentioned scars. You've also got a lot of wounds and gore and things like that. Can you talk a bit about how all of those, how you work with all of those elements, and with the special effects makeup team and all those people?
Yeah, Justin Raleigh, who is Fractured Effects, he was our guy, and we had a lot of tests. Um, he created the arm for Jeff Daniels' character for when it gets shot, and it was very, Scott absolutely wanted to make sure that that camera angle went right through the arm so we could see the damage. Um, it's interesting when you're working with someone like Jeff because he had to ride with his hand tied in front of his back and then try to, in front. And we had the green screen or the green sleeve that was used. So that had its challenges for sure, but the Fractured Effects did an amazing job. They did such a great job with that. We also had Jack. We had a prosthetic piece made for him in his abdomen, and we had a bleeder put underneath. It's a little bladder bleeder. So it's just a little bladder underneath so that we could see the blood pump through. And we needed it to be open enough so Iobi could put in her special healing components. The scar and the knife wound on Michelle was not planned. We had that scene, and Michelle and I and Scott Frank were talking, and Michelle just really felt like it needed to be graphic to really show what she had gone through. So she brought up, let's have a scar. So because we hadn't planned on it, I just ended up using Third Degree, and we made the open wound with it, and then we also made the scar with it. So that was kind of an out of the kit effects, and which turned out good, thankfully, because sometimes when you don't have time to prep that stuff, you're like, oh my god. But I thought it was good. And then Fracture did all the hanging bodies, and then we would go in and just dress them, and so it was great. You get dirty, you get bloody. I mean, that's the part of westerns that I actually really love. It's like you kind of get your hands in it.
Right. Now you are a six-time Emmy nominee. You've been nominated twice for Breaking Bad, nominated for Temple Grandin, Georgia O'Keeffe, and as I said, for some westerns, Comanche Moon and Into the West. What has that recognition meant for you in your career?
Well, I got to tell you a story about Comanche Moon.
Please do.
In the USA Today, their review of Comanche Moon was that the makeup and hair and the costumes were over the top. And so I have it. I have the little article next to the Emmy nomination thing to remind myself that sometimes you just gotta be true to yourself and what you're doing for the characters. But it's interesting. Nobody's really asked me that, and I have to say that I was a small girl in Albuquerque, New Mexico. That's where I grew up. And, when I moved to LA, I had no idea that I would be doing makeup because I had not intended to do makeup. That kind of came from a fluke in a conversation. And I ended up meeting Harry Blake, who was Johnny Carson's makeup artist, and Maurice Stein, who owns Cinema Secrets in Burbank. And they kind of took me under their wing. And so for me, it means a lot. It means that my peers actually think I'm doing a good job And that's so important to me because they are the people that I aspire to and that I respect. So when someone gives me that confidence to say, hey, you're really good at this, you know, I can't trade that for anything. It's just, it means a lot.
Well, thank you so much for your time, and congratulations on your work on Godless. It was a real pleasure talking with you. Of
Great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time.
course, thank you. Have a good one.
To take